What's up, everybody? I'm Joe Brown, and this is Heresy Financial. We're going to discuss some details about the Austrian Business Cycle Theory today. Because according to the Austrian Business Cycle Theory, the boom-bust cycle emerges as a response to a deviation in the market interest rate from the natural interest rate. And it also says that that deviation in interest rate is caused by significant increases in the money supply. Now, this might come as a little bit of a shock, but according to this theory, you would expect then that under a fully reserved gold standard, no central bank, no fractional reserve banking, that gold is money, that the increase in the gold supply, even from mining, would set in motion a boom-bust cycle. And so what I'm going to show you today is why that's not true, and it's not actually just a strict increase in the supply of money that causes the boom-bust cycle, and we will show what is really at the center of fiat inflation causing the boom-bust cycle. Ready? Let's dive in. Pretty much everything that I'm talking about today is laid out in a fantastic article from Mises.org. It's written by Frank Shostak, and I will link that in the description below if you want to dive a little bit deeper into this topic. What we're going to look at is what triggers the boom-bust cycle. If you're not familiar with the boom-bust cycle according to Austrian Business Cycle Theory, and you want to understand the mechanics of where fully reserved gold standard money systems came from and how they kind of evolved to get fractional reserve banking and evolved from there into central banks and just pure fiat systems, watch this video. This is on kind of the origins of money and that evolution, and that'll give you a good foundation for what we're going to talk about in this video. As a quick recap, the boom-bust cycle, according to Austrian Business Cycle Theory, is one that emerges as a result of a manipulation in the interest rate, a deviation really in the market interest rate from the natural interest rate, and that is caused by an increase in the supply of money. Now, apparently, Ludwig von Mises actually believed that gold mining, to a significant extent, if the supply of gold increased too much, it could set in motion this effect. But due to the characteristics of gold and how difficult it is to produce new gold, it was extremely unlikely for this to happen, simply because regardless of any monetary or financial incentives to produce more gold, the average inflation rate of gold for thousands of years has been 1.5%, and that's right about in line with population growth, and it has never exceeded 2%. Now, contrast the physical limitations that nature has placed on producing new gold. Contrast that with how quickly the fiat monetary supply can be inflated at. The only limitation is political will. And so when you combine fractional reserve banking, where banks can lend money into existence through the expansion of credit, and central banks' ability to literally print money, the total supply of money is far more elastic. And in systems like this, unsustainable booms will occur whenever the new money enters the market and it distorts the real interest rates before other prices have had time to adjust. So that was the view that Ludwig von Mises proposed, and Murray Rothbard actually disagreed with him about this, and he said it's not strictly the increase in the supply of money that causes this, it's actually the increase in the supply of money out of thin air. And here's the key distinction on why that matters. It all comes down to how that purchasing power is obtained. In a fiat monetary system, where you have a currency that is declared legal tender by law, the average person can only obtain purchasing power by offering something to somebody else of value. Either that's time or labor or selling a good or a service, but you have to produce value into the economy in order to obtain a piece of purchasing power. There is no other way to obtain purchasing power outside of theft. Now, this is also why counterfeiting is illegal in fiat monetary systems, because there is no intrinsic difference between a counterfeited dollar bill and a dollar bill printed by the Federal Reserve. They could be made out of the exact same cloth, with the exact same ink printed on them, with the exact same watermarks and security features. Counterfeiters have gotten very good at being able to replicate everything. And so there is no inherent difference in the actual physical stuff that's produced there. The reason why it's illegal is because if it was legal, And anybody who wanted to could obtain purchasing power by simply clicking a button. It would immediately undermine the purchasing power of all of those existing dollars, rendering them useless. It would no longer be necessary to offer a good or offer a service or value, time, labor, something to the economy in order to obtain purchasing power. You could obtain purchasing power without offering any of that. And as soon as that's available to everyone, the very thing that you're printing in order to obtain that purchasing power loses all of its purchasing power because everybody else can get it by printing themselves. And so nobody's going to offer you something of real value like labor or a good if you give them that piece of paper, because they can print that piece of paper themselves without having to give up something of real value. So this is why counterfeiting is illegal in fiat systems. Now, it's obviously not illegal for the Federal Reserve and the government because this is a primary way that they fund themselves, which gives the central government the monopoly on obtaining purchasing power for themselves without having to provide anything of value to the economy. This is where I really like the example of the pizza. The units of money in an economy, if we're comparing it to a pizza, are like the number of slices in the pizza. The total amount of dollars in existence, the total money supply, inherently necessarily equals the pool of wealth, the total pool of wealth. If you're going to buy all the stuff, it would cost you all the money by definition, because how you're measuring the price of everything is in the money. And so you're measuring the pizza with the number of slices. When the central government obtains purchasing power through the creation of new money out of thin air, they're obtaining purchasing power without providing real value, which means they are not contributing to the total pool of wealth at the same time as that purchasing power is being created. Which means that if we look at the pizza, what they're actually doing is creating another slice out of a bunch of tiny slivers of all of the other slices. You can take a pizza that is 8 slices and turn it into 10 slices without creating more pizza. All you have to do is take a little slice off of each existing 8 pieces and throw those together to make 10 pieces, 2 new pieces. And the key thing here is that those 2 new pieces that were just created out of thin air, they got their purchasing power, they got their pizza from the other slices of pizza. They didn't contribute any new wealth to the economy. And so just like counterfeiting undermines the production of value into an economy, and if everybody could counterfeit, immediately those dollars would be worthless because it would not be necessary to provide something of value to obtain that specific dollar. They'd lose their purchasing power. In the same way, to a lesser extent, it doesn't happen, 100% all at once. When the government counterfeits, even though they have a monopoly on counterfeiting, they're undermining a certain percentage of the purchasing power of all of the existing pool of money, because the pool of wealth is not changing. Okay, I think I've beat that horse to death at this point. How does that contrast with a fully reserved, no central bank, no fractional reserve banking, gold standard system? Because in a gold standard system, you can still go dig in the ground, you can pull rocks out, you can melt them down, you can refine it and turn it into a yellow shiny metal, and you can use that to buy things. And so that process happens to a significant extent. Does it do the same thing and undermine the production of value, undermine the purchasing power of the existing stock of gold? Well, the answer is partly yes and partly no. And here's what I mean by that. Price inflation and price deflation still happen under fully reserved, no central banking gold standards. You can see that throughout history, mainly because over the long period of time, deflation is the natural force of history. There is progress, there is technological advancements, and people figure out ways to get more for less. That's the definition of deflation. So the purchasing power of the total stock of money increases over time because the total pool of wealth grows at a faster pace than the total pool of money grows. Therefore, each individual amount of money goes further than it used to. Further than that, the economy is not an evenly rotating one, and it is not a static economy. It is dynamic, and it is constantly changing. And so prices of goods and services, according to subjective valuations, are constantly changing everywhere throughout time. And so you'll still experience small amounts of inflation and over large periods of time, deflation underneath a gold standard, or I should say gold as money. Now, we've seen how under a fiat standard, when new purchasing power is created out of nothing and spent into the economy, it distorts the market interest rate it deviates it away from the natural interest rate, which triggers the boom-bust cycle because it causes malinvestment in things that would not have been able to be started, misallocation of resources that eventually has to come back down and revert to the mean. That's why it's not really a business cycle, it's really a credit cycle or a debt cycle. And so would you get the same thing if you struck a massive gold mine and started producing a ton of gold and were able to spend that? Well, we have to look at how you're obtaining that purchasing power. Number one, it costs labor, it costs time, it costs capital deployed in order to obtain that purchasing power. So the very act of obtaining that purchasing power has a cost associated with it. So right off the bat, we can tell that this is different than fiat monetary expansion, which there is no cost to expanding. It's done by political will. Secondly, when that purchasing power is actually deployed, it's contributing real wealth into the system because you're spending a commodity that has use value. And so you're not just shaving slices off the existing pieces of wealth, like in a pizza. You're not shaving slices off and creating a new slice. You're actually making the pizza larger because you've deployed resources in order to produce something of value, namely a commodity, in this case gold, and putting that into the economy. And so whether you are mining gold and spending it, or whether you're obtaining gold by selling something and then spending that, in either case, under a commodity money standard, the money itself is not being created out of thin air, and it actually increases the total stock of wealth in the system. And under the case of mining, it's at the same time as a total stock of money is being created. And so that is the key difference between a fully reserved gold standard system and a fiat system, is that the money created out of thin air, the difference is how you have to obtain the purchasing power. And under commodity money standards, when you obtain purchasing power, you're growing the total pool of wealth that's in the system. Under a fiat money standard, depending on whether it's bank credit expansion or government printing, the purchasing power is obtained by withdrawing it from the existing pool of money, therefore undermining the purchasing power of the existing slices. Now, the last thing that I have to talk about, because I know it's probably on your mind, is what about something like Bitcoin? Hypothetically, let's say Bitcoin is the money for everybody everywhere. We know that the supply of Bitcoin does increase. And the way that it increases is by assigning new Bitcoins to miners as a reward for securing the network. And so under a fully reserved, no fractional reserve banking, no central bank system with Bitcoin as the money, would you still get the boom-bust cycles like we get on fiat? Because you're not using a commodity money like you are with gold or silver or copper or some of the other ones that we've had in the past. And so as you produce new Bitcoins and spend them into the economy, you're technically not putting something into the economy like a commodity. So are you expanding the total pool of wealth? Well, we have to ask the question, how do you obtain purchasing power in this Bitcoin standard system? You obtain purchasing power by, number one, you could sell things, right? You could sell your time, you could sell your labor, you could sell a good, you could sell a service, you could just do what everybody else does right now to get their hands on money. You provide value into the economy. Obviously, that's a given. We're not talking about that. What about the miners? Because they're getting a supply of new Bitcoins. Well, how are they getting this? Well, they're securing the network. They're making sure that the payment system continues to operate the way it's supposed to operate. And so actually, in reality, the Bitcoin miners are obtaining Bitcoin the same way everybody else does, which is providing a service. And so even under a Bitcoin standard system, you would not have the boom-bust cycle like you do under a fiat system, because it would operate very similar to a gold standard system in that the only way to obtain new purchasing power would be to contribute to growing the total pool of wealth. And finally, I know you've heard me say it a bunch of times here, but I want to be clear about this. The key is that it's a fully reserved monetary system with no central banking, and that there is no capability for the expansion of the money supply through things like derivatives or fractionally reserved banks. And this is why you had boom-bust cycles exist on gold standards in the past, and it was simply because of fractional reserve banking. That was it. You don't have that capability unless the fractional reserve banking system is there, because the fractional reserve banking system is itself a way to obtain purchasing power without contributing to the total pool of wealth. And so it deviates that market interest rate away from the natural interest rate as a result of that artificial expansion in the money supply that eventually has to revert to the mean. Wow, thanks for sticking around. I know that was a little bit of an in-depth conversation, talking a little bit more about economic economic theory rather than, stuff that's going on in the news. If you like these kind of videos, let me know in the comments section below whether I should continue to make videos like this in the future or not. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.